And in the interest of using our time expeditiously and wisely today, I would like to bring on our CEO, Jeff Green, to get us started. Take it away, Jeff.
Thanks so much, Robert. I'll add my welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm going to say afternoon. I'm actually coming to you from our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. here, alongside all of our statewide association colleagues and our National Council of Nonprofits, trading notes on the moment we all find ourselves in. But that's for another day and another webinar. So today, I'll just say I'm happy to have you all here with us. This is, as it has been for as long as I can remember, one of our most sought after resources. And it's not even ours. We're simply one of many partners that helped put this together. But it's the annual survey of compensation in our nonprofit sector. And of course, this is a big issue for many reasons. One is a long-standing challenge of trying to make it sustainable for nonprofit staff to be compensated at a not only living but thriving wage and competitive wage. And we're not talking just about cash compensation, but benefits and other resources for the teams that staff our fabulous nonprofits. We are also always looking at trends and what changes over time and what doesn't. And in fact, what we've got today is the very latest snapshot of what that looks like in California. This is a survey that has been done now for many years, and I'm about to bring on one of our longtime partners here to share with you all the details. But before I do that, let's take a look at, just for those of you newer to Cal Nonprofits, how this all fits in for us. We are a policy alliance of 10,000 or so nonprofit organizations across the state of California, about a quarter of whom are regular members, and we invite you always to join us and access the many benefits of membership. And I will say in this moment, the additional benefit that we don't talk about quite as often in what I would call previous or normal times, in a moment like this, the political power of the sector is as critical as it's ever been. So by joining the California Association, you are also by extension a member of the National Council, and we are all part of this national network of organizations that are not only guarding and safekeeping the trust that we have from our communities, but building that strength in this time when we are being challenged in direct ways that are new. So that's my pitch. We do three things: policy and advocacy work, which we talk about frequently. We do education, such as this webinar, and we do data and research work on our own. But in the spirit of what we're doing today, we also push out excellent data and research that is done by others, and that is in fact what we're going to do today. And that is the Nonprofit Compensation Associates, aka Rita Haronian, who has been doing this survey, and this is not a joke, folks, 42 years that she has been either a primary, the sole, or core member of this team doing this research. And this is something we have relied on for as long as I have been in the nonprofit sector. We're grateful to have Rita with us today to share the latest of the Northern and Southern California surveys. And so with no further ado, I will bring Rita on to the screen. Welcome, Rita.
Thank you very much. There we go.
Now we get to see you. Great. All right. Well, I've just told people the big secret that you've been doing this for 42 years. So I'm going to get out of the way. But
Yes.
Rita and I will have a conversation along the way as we take a look at the latest data. So
Good.
all yours.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here with all of you. Grateful to Jeff and Cal Nonprofits for all the continuing support of the survey, both Northern and Southern California, and inviting me here today. When I saw the names come through the chat, I recognized a number of them. And so I know that some of you are familiar with the survey, but probably some aren't. I'm going to really quickly talk about the rationale for the survey, and what we see here on the screen is a sample compensation page, the top part of the compensation page, so you can see the kind of information that's presented. The idea is we want to take as accurate a sort of snapshot of the nonprofit employment market as we can get. And then people use this information when it's compiled in the report to make decisions about compensation, setting pay levels effectively, prioritizing their resources, looking at what other organizations are doing about employee benefits, and many other HR-related policies, compensation-related policies. It changes a bit every year. We really want to keep up with what's happening for the nonprofit community. We rely on input and suggestions from survey participants to help us do that and make additions and sometimes deletions every year. So we really do care about your input as the people who use this information. Really, I think that there are many compensation surveys and multiple nonprofit compensation surveys, but I think what's makes what we call the Fair Pay Survey for California special is that we're presenting local compensation data, and that really matters because our employment markets here, first of all, there are multiple employment markets, certainly, and they're different from what you would see elsewhere. There are surveys that, for example, have a much broader geographic scope and might report California as a line of data, or even the Western United States. To the extent that we get data from very well-defined counties or sometimes groups of counties, that's what we report. And we work really hard to collect as much data as possible so that the survey report can give people in different locations information about what's happening really in their local communities. So that's what it's all about. Before we move on, I want to say something about the what you see on the page here. So at the top, that information, the first few lines, came from all of the responses, and this is just a sample from a previous survey. Uh, Employers that reported at least one person in this job. This is the intermediate administrative assistant job. And then you'll see we break it out under that by annual expenses of the organization, by geographic location. This example page came from Northern California. It's not on the page because there isn't space, but we also break out by the field of service, by the number of FTE employees, which along with annual expenses is another way to get at the size of the organization, which matters a lot for particular jobs. Also, we report about with the supervisory responsibility of this particular job that's reported for each organization, and that also is relevant for some jobs. So going across the top, you see the number of organizations, the number of employees, because often there's more than one person. An organization may have multiple administrative assistants. The percentiles come next. 10th, 25th, median, that's another way to say the 50th percentile, 75th and 90th percentiles. The way we get those numbers is by taking all the individual salary numbers for actual employees and lining them up and then choosing the one that's in a particular position. So the median would be the one that's right in the middle between the lowest and the highest. The 10th percentile would be the one-tenth of the way up, depending on how many there are. So it's not the lowest, but it's close to the lowest. 25th percentile is a quarter of the way up, and so on. So the 90th percentile is not the highest, but it's certainly on the high side. And we do that so that you can have a sense of how the data is distributed among all these employers. And then the two average columns, average by employee, that means we added up all the individual salary numbers and divided by how many people. And average by organization, that we get that by weighting each organization equally, whether they reported one person or 10 people, it doesn't matter. We get one number from that organization and then weigh them all equally to come up with that average. And that's helpful because it's just another reference point telling you what these organizations are reporting without having any particular organization sort of disproportionately influencing the average. So you can look at those numbers and get a sense of how the data falls within the ranges that we see.
And Rita, can you share, I know in past, for those who've been with us and when we've done this before, we're starting with just sort of a decoding of how to read these sheets, because that's often a question about what is, there's a lot of data here. Can you speak to the blank cells or what's the limit there when you don't have enough data
Yes.
points and you leave a cell open?
Yes, thank you. So for example, you see Central Valley, we had 11 organizations and 51 employees. Typically, we will fill in all the percentiles if we have at least 12 employees reported. First, sorry, I'm going to go back and say, in order for anything to show up on this line, we need at least 5 organizations. So that's to start. This is a job where we get a lot of data. The general thing for all the percentiles, you can see the Sierra Nevada, North State line. We reported the median and the two averages. We had 8 employees. We need 12 employees to report all those other percentiles. But the Central Valley line is an exception. We've only reported the average by organization. And the reason for that is it happens with that data sample that one organization reported proportionately a lot of the actual individual employees in this job. There's a threshold, I think it's 40% now. So if one organization is responsible for 40% or more of the employees, then we don't report the percentiles and the average by employee. We only report the average by organization because those other numbers would be very heavily influenced by just one source organization.
Great, thank you. And I'll just make a pitch here. I know Rita will do it along the way, but those of you in Northern California that have participated, that is a much longer running survey. Those of us who know the Southern California survey that was previously done by the Center for Nonprofit Management, it was more recently that Nonprofit Compensation Associates stepped in. So we're still building that base. And I know, Rita, you can speak to how many and how far we are from what we'd ultimately like, but we appreciate everybody participating because this is only as good as the participation, as Rita has said.
Yes, thank you. We have certainly made progress in Southern California. We've done it for a few years now. And obviously, the potential for a very, very robust survey in Southern California is great. This year we got, I think, 728 organizations in Northern California and very close to 300, 289, I think, Southern California. And as we do it year after year, people become more aware of it. People expect it. The word gets around about it, and we're really committed to building the Southern California survey so that we have more and more data to report as well.
Great, thank
Okay,
you.
let's go on to the next slide. We have several that I think the back one or two more, one more. Yeah, that's it. So we have several examples that show all of the breakouts here. The page was split into two pieces. And here's the breakout for the executive director CEO job for Southern California as an example. So one thing I would point out about this right away is that you can see when you look at annual expenses and also when you look at the number of FTEs, you can see how the pay for this job, executive level jobs in general, and certainly this job, the pay levels really track in a direct way with the size of the organization, and that's reasonable to expect. And this is something that we expect to see and that we do see year after year. So a larger organization with someone at the top executive person is dealing with a larger budget to administer, more employees, the complexity of the job increases as the organizations get bigger. So we do see that relationship, and that points to the fact that when people ask me what to look at on this page, if it's an executive level job or a director level job, I do suggest, to the degree that we have enough data to report, that you look at either the annual expenses or the number of FTEs. They're pointing to the same thing. Also, geographic location is important. In Southern California, in general, the differences are not so great. I'm not. I have to say honestly that I wonder, as we get more data in Southern California, if some differences will become more apparent. But I do suggest that people look at location. Field of service, um, I don't typically suggest that people look at that so much for making decisions about pay. It's there for more perspective. It's there so that you can see what kinds of organizations contributed to all this data, which I think is useful. Number of employees managed for some jobs that do have supervisory responsibility, that is useful. It includes both direct and indirect employees. So for this job, it sort of duplicates in concept at least the number of FTEs information, but not as effectively because the categories are not as uh, geared toward this job. So in the survey, when we say number of employees managed, that's direct and indirect, and that means we're counting people who are directly supervised by the person in this job, and also everybody under those people going down the levels of the org chart. So we're asking for a measure of the overall supervisory responsibility of the person in this job, not only the people who directly report to this person, but including everybody under them as well. Okay, and next we have another example. This is back, that's one. No, back a few more. A couple more, back a couple more. One, that's it. Northern Cal, oh, we had it. Director of Development, you'll find it for Northern California. Yeah, good. Okay, so here's a director level job. And again, if you look at the size of the organization, there certainly is a relationship between the size and the pay level. Not quite to the same degree as for the executive director. It doesn't spread out as much, but there is a relationship. Northern California, if you look at the location breakout, there really tends to be a pretty clear difference between some of these geographic areas. For example, the Central Bay Area versus um, the Central Valley, for example. Um, I want to say quickly, um, when people ask me what to look at, if it's an organization in the Central Bay Area, meaning the 6 counties listed here, um, I do suggest that people look at the Central Bay Area line. You can look at certainly the county line, but the Bay Area is, I find, a pretty cohesive employment market, and having more data on that Central Bay Area line is helpful, as well as looking at the more specific line like Marin, for example. Um, Again, field of services may be interesting for context. The number of employees managed is relevant for this job. We would expect higher pay for a job that involves more supervision. I want to say quickly, I know that these numbers are very small, and the Cal Nonprofits is going to make these slides available. So you will be able to look at them, and that's part of why I'm going to move through them as quickly as I can, so that we can cover them. Okay, let's move on to the next one. One back up one. That's it. Program manager. So here's a manager level job. The size of the organization doesn't track as strongly with pay levels, either financial size or FTEs compared to what we've seen. And there are some differences certainly in the geographic breakouts, but they're not as dramatic as what we saw in the Northern California survey page before, which again, um, I I wonder when we have more data how much of a difference that may make. And we have one more to look at, the administrative assistant for Northern California. One more slide. That's it. So here uh, differences in pay based on your organization size for this kind of job is really not predictable. So we don't really see a relationship either biennial expenses or the number of FTEs. But this is a Northern California slide, and certainly there are significant differences based on geography. And next, I did a a calculation of geographic differences. They're here just because I did them. They aren't based on to I have to say I wouldn't put too much stock in these, especially in Southern California, because we don't have as much data. I think the Northern California numbers at least point to something real when you look at the different areas and quite significant differences in overall pay levels. And I did this by looking at the jobs for which we had enough data and just comparing overall what the pay levels look like in each of these locations. Um, with Southern California, again, with more data, I suspect that there would be the differences would become more apparent. But uh, this is based on what we see now, and I'll continue to look at this in the future and see if something more definite emerges about the differences in pay levels. One thing I would say is between Los Angeles and the Central Bay Area, pay levels tend to be very close. So, we had 104% of the overall pay levels in the Central Bay Area, so certainly higher than some of the more outlying areas. Los Angeles, 102%, so a little bit higher than the other locations in the Southern California report.
Yeah, and I know this is an area where we've gotten a lot of questions after last year's survey, people being surprised on the Southern California side in particular about how close these
Yeah,
geographies seemed. And I think we, if I may speak for us here, we suspect it's partly just sample size,
I think
and we're
so.
just not seeing the full breadth of what's happening.
I think that's right. And I also, looking at the organizations that participate, there are large organizations that participate in the survey in all of these
Yeah.
areas. And so for certain jobs, those are going to, the larger organizations are going to pay more. And if they're dispersed somewhat throughout the sample geographically, that's going to influence these kinds of numbers. But with more participants in general, we may see a different picture. Okay, next we're going to look at Executive Director CEO pay. This is something that we have tracked. You can see in 2013, uh, the line at the bottom, for each year, there are two columns. One is telling you what percentage of the people in this job are women. It's always been more than 50%. And then the second column is telling you what is the average pay for women as a percentage of the average pay for men. So back in 2013, um, 82%, that's a pretty significant gap. But the thing that I noticed that I thought was important to pay attention to is if you look at the size of the organizations, each line for the size of the organizations. As the organizations get bigger, it's less likely overall that a woman is in this position, more likely that a man is. And that was really influencing the overall gap number because, as we've just seen, the larger organizations, especially for this job, are going to pay significantly more. So it's been interesting to see how the proportion of women at different sized organizations has changed. Looking at this year, there's a bit of that pattern still, but it's not anywhere near as pronounced. If you look at the percent female column for 2025, it still exists, but um, it's definitely closer. and that average women's pay as percent of average men's pay in 2023, for each line, the women were paid at least somewhat less than the men. For the past several years, if you look at the average women pay as the percent of average men's pay, that's really not the case. It's not predictable that the men are paid more if you look at each line of similarly sized organizations. So something has changed along these lines. I think the increased awareness of pay equity, the California Fair Pay Act, many things have contributed to the sort of evolution of what we see here. It's not. I mean, 96%. It's a much smaller gap than it was, say, 12 years ago. And there's been a pretty steady narrowing of the gap during that time. And we have a similar slide for Southern California. So not as much data because we haven't been doing it as long. This year, the overall gap was 93%. And again, if you look at the percent of women in these jobs from the small organizations to the large organizations, there is a difference as the organizations get larger, but it's not the same difference as we saw overall, even back in 2021. So for the past couple of years, women have been at least in 50%, last year 57, this year 50. I don't think that's significant really, of the executive director CEO jobs in the largest organizations. So I think that has a lot to do with the narrowing of the gap. And if I had to guess, I would guess that this trend is going to continue, uh, but we will see. Uh, Also, really quickly, I want to say um, there are, in both surveys, there are people reported in this job who identify as non-binary, non-conforming, but not to a great enough number so that we can do that kind of analysis of including them. And the way all of this is sliced and diced, we would need a greater number of people to look at that directly. Okay, next we have DEI work. Well, this is a subject that we hear about in the news these days. We started, excuse me, asking this question in 2022, and and since then there's been a modest, but I think meaningful increase um, in the number of people who said DEI is standing line item in the budget or policies are implemented. That's the next to last line, from 13% to 24%. We also had from last year a small increase in the percentage that said none, from 17 to 23. So I don't know if that's people who feel like that they've done their DEI work and it is no longer as active as it was. I think there are a lot of questions to ask about this in the future, especially given the political climate around DEI. In the report itself, there are more follow-up questions like who among the staff is responsible? Is there a committee or a working group? Who's on it? Do they work with a consultant? Things like that. But we also asked, for those who said no, no stage of DEI work or none at the top, we asked for reasons. And there were some reasons that people could choose. For example, DEI is essential to the organization based on our mission and services. It's not a priority. We don't have internal consensus about it. There was also a write-in opportunity for people, and there were a number that wrote in on their own that changes in the federal government's position about DEI initiatives has deterred them or discouraged them from uh, doing this sort of work within their organizations. That not surprising,
Yeah.
but I thought that was worth noting.
Yeah, and I also appreciate you saying out loud your prior point, Rita, that the none doesn't mean no engagement necessarily. It means that they don't necessarily see it as separate work, which you could argue is actually even a stronger DEI framework. So that's something we didn't dig deeply into, but for some organizations, they would, the answers essentially said this is sort of baked into who we are and where we came from. So I think it's a fascinating snapshot in the moment of how it is framed today. But if we dug back further, we might find a different answer.
Right. I think for next year, it's worth retooling this to get more, just clearer information, for example, about what none might mean to people and get, I think, m potentially a clearer sense about the federal government's role in
Rule on
the
questioning.
decisions that are
Yeah.
being made.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
next, paid time off. This is a basic employee benefit that we report every year. Some organizations have separate categories for different kinds of paid time off. Some combine vacation and sick into what is called sometimes PTO. Um, so just to get a sense about the numbers, I picked the fifth year of employment to report the total number of days that are given as paid time off. Typically, and we see this here, the organizations that separate all these kinds of days uh, end up providing more altogether compared with the PTO organizations. I suspect, though, that the PTO organizations, those employees may use more of their paid time off because vacation and sick is combined. So that's my speculation. PTO has always represented a minority of survey participants, and it has decreased somewhat overall. It's gone up and down a little bit, but it has decreased a bit over the last few years.
I noted in this too that if you look at it seems that 2014 was it's sort of inverse arcs of
Yeah,
who uses which system. And I do remember the time when that was trending the other direction, that it had become increasingly popular to use and adopt a PTO model, and that we seem to be going back to what was more common 20 years ago. Is that true more broadly? Do you have other data to compare that to?
it certainly looks that way with respect to this question. That was that was the peak PTO year.
Yeah.
Leading up to that, it was increasing, and since then it has fallen off. And I don't really know. It'd be interesting to hear what people's experience is with this at their organizations and why they've made the decisions that they've made or changed from one to the other. Um, but that's what it appears to be. It's still, it's still a significant kind of minority practice. Next, we have employer contribution to insurance. This is medical insurance we're dealing with here, and you can all not be surprised to see that the average employer cost per month per employee has steadily climbed. The percentage of employers who pay 100% of the monthly premium for employees, that means an individual employee, has slipped just a bit over the last few years. The percentage that pay 100% for dependents has been relatively steady. It's a small percentage, but I hear from organizations that have offered this benefit for a number of years, and in some cases, it is a real priority for them, for their employees. And so people I know work hard in general to provide the best insurance benefits they possibly can for their employees in a way that they can manage financially. It's been a big challenge and continues to be a big challenge. I want to say, point out quickly that many organizations have more than one, for example, more than one HMO option or more than one PPO option. For the purposes of reporting their information for the survey, we ask them to give us the information about the HMO option that has the highest level of enrollment. Otherwise, I think we could do a whole survey that just is devoted to medical insurance or insurance in general. So it's streamlined a bit, So some of these organizations that say, yes, uh, we're we pay 100% for 60 we pay 100% of the insurance for employees. They may well have um, a buy-up plan that they don't pay 100% of, but employees have the option to enroll in and contribute something toward through payroll deductions. So that's another part of this picture as well. Um, in retirement plans, this hasn't changed really much at all in the last year or even couple of years. 90% of our survey participants do have a retirement plan, and most of them, 84%, make a contribution toward it. There's been a slight decrease if you look at the average percent of salary contributed in the last few years. Well, again, since 2014, that's interesting. It's been below 5%. It's decreased by a little bit. Um, and contributing based on percent of salary is by far the most common uh, way that the contribution is calculated. So that's something that we've seen consistently. Okay, I'm going to talk a bit about salary increase budgets. Um, we have the years here, columns for the years. I want to say though that there's a lot of overlap year to year in survey participation, but they are not the same sample every year. So, and that goes for all of these comparisons. We can't necessarily say that the differences that we see year to year can exactly be ascribed to the nonprofit community as a whole, but there is a lot of overlap. So comparing this year to what we've seen before, the median of 3%, pre-pandemic, that was the number that we saw as the median and also the most frequently answered percentage when we asked for an overall salary increase budget. And then shortly, dealing with the pandemic and the pressure on employers, we saw 4% for a couple years, 3.5 last year. This year it's back to 3, which, as I said, was what we saw for many, many years. The thing that I find notable about this slide is the percent of organizations with salary increase budgets, the third line of numbers down, went from 91, well, 89, 91, 90 to 83. It's not a huge drop, but I suspect that it's a significant drop. And I wonder whether that indicates a sense of uncertainty among some organizations about economic conditions on the horizon. We do hear concerns about economic conditions in general, whether inflation will pick up again, cuts to funding, especially cuts to funding from the federal government, pressure from the federal government, DEI already mentioned, climate-related work, work with immigrant communities, education, other advocacy work, and even not so long ago, a potential threat to allow the executive branch to revoke nonprofit status, which so far has been averted. I know Cal Nonprofits has had that very much on the radar screen.
Yeah.
So there's general economic concern and also some specific concern among many organizations. And I saw that 83%, which was, a notable drop, and wonder whether that might be an indication of
Yeah.
concern among
You
some.
know, Rita, the other anecdotal story we've heard, and again only anecdotal, but it might be enough to indicate something that would make that 7% dip, was that as organizations were trying to catch up through the pandemic and felt they had fallen far behind in an inflation environment, that having pushed ahead over those last few years, that they felt like they had now reached something that was fair and they felt less pressure to keep
Oh,
adjusting at that pace.
yeah.
So I don't know if we could ever pinpoint how true that is or not, but it's a story we've heard more than a few times, that
Mhm.
folks felt like they'd done their catch up for the time being and they were going to pause at current rates.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's something that you saw in the survey, but it is something we've heard in the field.
That sounds plausible as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Or, it's always a combination of things, but yes.
yeah. Okay,
Okay, I'm going to really
thank you.
quickly talk about the types of salary increases. We break this out so that people have a sense about on what basis organizations are making decisions. Merit performance is the sort of factor cited most frequently. There's very little change since last year or the last couple years in the percentage of organizations that look at one sort of increase or another. The average increase cited has gone down a bit, but not much. External market, that means looking at data like survey data. And typically, if an organization cites that, they're not looking to do something organization-wide, but for specific positions. And similarly, internal equity, uh, comparing jobs internally to see that jobs with similar levels of responsibility are paid in line with each other in a way that makes sense. That would be something typically that is looked at for specific jobs, but merit, across the board, cost of living, length of service, those reflect policies that we see organizations carrying out organization-wide. Okay, voluntary turnover rates. Well, it's very similar to last year. Still high compared with, say, 2010 to 2016, but close to the pre-pandemic levels of 2020. And in general, we see concern about turnover easing somewhat in the last couple years. So another indication that conditions, in some ways at least, are closer to the years immediately preceding the pandemic. And we have two different sorts of categories here on the left and on the right. That's just because the survey changed the way we break out the financial size of organizations in 2016, and that's why those lines don't match up exactly. All right, factors related to voluntary turnover. Higher pay is always the most frequently reported answer since we began asking this. And of course, organizations often give more than one answer. Most factors are very close to what we saw last year. We added the six on the bottom in 2023, and to me the really notable thing here is 30% said stress burnout was a factor that they were aware of, leading to voluntary turnover at their organization. It's not a majority, but it's a pretty significant minority if you think about hundreds of nonprofits, that 30% of them um, are aware that employee stress burnout has contributed to voluntary turnover.
Yeah.
And job families. Difficult to hire for or retain people in. Again, our numbers this year are quite close to what we've seen in very recent years. There's a slight drop in the program delivery line, which is always the highest line. Um, those are the most likely to be public-facing jobs. They were certainly the most directly impacted by the pandemic, and not half, but not so far from half of our survey participants are still reporting challenges hiring people and keeping people in those jobs. And then we have some more general questions about the economic environment. We've asked these questions for years. The percentage of participants anticipating increased competition for employees is 63%, down from 71 last year. That's one of the signs to me that it seems that the sort of most acute pressure that we were seeing in 2022, 2023 has abated somewhat. 28%, so between a quarter and a third, see turnover as a significant problem for them in the year ahead. So that's a more acute sort of awareness of this kind of issue. And 36% say they expect to add to their workforce. It's not on the slide. 60% said they expected no significant change. Only 4% thought that they would be reducing their workforce. So more stable and on top of that, more expected increases than reductions. This is a new question. The idea of funders, making adjustments related to inflation for nonprofit contracts and grants. It's not terribly common, but it's been on the radar screen, I think, because of the relatively high inflation rate in recent years and uncertainty about where inflation may be headed. 11% of our survey participants said yes. 34% didn't know. I think that's really because the person at an organization who was providing this information wasn't always a person who would be certain about the answer to this question. But so it's a minority, but it is something that is happening, at least for some organizations. And those who got this kind of increase used it mostly for pay increases and general operating expenses. Those were the two most frequently cited uses for the increase in grants or contracts. Employee engagement. We revised this question this year and added a bunch of options here. And again, people chose often many of them. Um, Almost all participants chose at least one. 99% chose at least one. So to me, I see that as a sign of the ongoing concern about employee well-being, as well as a real motivation to retain employees and help with hiring as well. So that is certainly still very much on the radar screen. Living wage. I want to be clear. Living wage, here's my brief definition: an estimate of the local pay rate that a full-time employee requires to cover the costs of their family's basic needs where they live. So this is a calculation made based on geographic area. There are different living wage numbers depending on the size of the household. And certainly most organizations, 79% this year, said that paying a living wage is a strategic priority. Um, I want to be clear, though, that the survey does not report living wage. The survey reports the best picture we can have of prevailing wage. Living wage is a it's conceptually a different thing, and I put the source down there, the MIT calculator, which there's more than one, but that's a prominent one. If you're interested in finding out, that would be a place to go. Bonus incentive pay. Um, this has become a more common practice. At the top, you see different levels of jobs. 45% of organizations say that they have a policy about this for their executive directors. And this year in the survey, if you look below details for that position, 31% of people in this job actually did receive some bonus or incentive pay, and there you see the median and the average. We also asked whether organizations use a target percentage of salary to determine it, and 27% said yes, they do think about a target percentage of salary. Okay, we have next new questions relating to education. Student loan repayment. This is something that I've been talking to Jeff about. 17% said that they do participate in one or more programs. The PSLF is by far the most frequently cited, and 12%, 13, about an eighth of employers do some sort of tuition reimbursement to employees. We asked for the maximum amount annually for one employee, and there was quite a wide range. The median was $1,500.
This is one where, as Rita said, we've been into conversation, and I want to thank her for introducing this last year. This, for those who follow the work that Cal Nonprofits does in this area, we're a dozen years into our student debt program that we do here, and what we were able to introduce last year ourselves, and then sort of advocate for others to continue to consider, is the new federal Section 127 idea. So the PSLF, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness, of course, very much high profile in the news during the Biden administration, with multiple different attempts to both bolster it, clean up the program, as well as other kinds of debt forgiveness. But the newer piece, and I'll just use this platform to say it here, is that employers can, and it's tax-free at the federal level to the employee. It's sort of in negotiation at the state level, but we began doing it for our team last year, and then with a good experience, we've actually done a webinar or two on this already as well. offering as generally it's seen as a retention, not a recruitment tool, but for people that come into the sector with student debt, given that what else we've of course just looked at here with compensation levels, it's always a challenge. So it's a new tool that I'll just toss out there that is available to nonprofits to do as a way to help those coming with student debt into the sector get rid of that debt sooner rather than later, and hopefully stay within the sector should they so choose.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
Full-time work week, we started asking about alternate work weeks last year. 40 hours a week is still by far the most frequently given answer for what your standard work week is. But there are some organizations that are using alternate work weeks for at least some of their jobs. It doesn't mean all of them, but some. And we'll keep asking about this and see if we can identify a trend. And then the last thing here I want to talk about briefly, remote hybrid in-person work. Again, 2025 is very similar to 2024. This is something that accelerated certainly with the pandemic. And it seems that for the time being, the numbers, proportions for hybrid and remote work have somewhat stabilized and have become a regular practice for many organizations, at least in relation to some of their jobs. Not necessarily all of them, but some of their jobs. And then we did some follow-up questions on the next slide for organizations that have any remote and or hybrid employees. Um, 27% said they required some to return to in-person work since the pandemic's onset. 8% think that they will this year. 56% reimburse for some at-home work expenses. There's more detail about that in the survey. And most organizations, 65%, say that the the agreement about an actual work schedule for these employees is set jointly by the organization and the employee. And then a little bit more follow-up. Hiring remote employees who live beyond the commuting distance out of the local area this year. 60% of organizations said that they hire at least some people out of the local area. 47% even said that they hire outside of California.
Yeah.
And the question about adjusting pay based on cost of living differences for your remote people, that's something that I think is still in flux. We had 21% this year who said yes, they do. I don't think that is significantly different from the 25% last year. And again, that's something that I think over time it'll be clearer about how organizations are dealing with that question. So that's it. I know we have some questions here and a few minutes to get to them. Suggestions for the future. I am determined to do an online query function allowing people to search for multiple parameters for compensation at once. I think that would be just a great addition to the survey. And then a couple other things on my list. But if there are questions that we have time for, I'd be happy to try to get to them.
Yeah, thanks, Rita. There's a few in the and thank you, Robert. I know has been answering some of them as we've been going along.
Oh, good.
But I mean, Mary had a question: is there a distinction of salaries based on revenue base? We didn't really do it with revenue, but total budget. So we've not, and I don't believe, Rita, you've ever looked into it based on revenue mix.
No, we look at the reason we do expenses instead is just because there isn't a perfect way to do it. We're trying to get to the financial size. And we found that revenue tends to have more ups and downs from one year to the next. Expenses can certainly have ups and downs, but it tends to be a little more stable. So trying to get the financial size, we've used expenses as the number.
Right. Steve asked a question that I think we just touched on at the end there around remote. And the question was, how would you recommend combining, in quotes, things like location and annual expense when trying to set salaries? And it seems like that is rising, even though it's still a minority of organizations that are experimenting with that.
Right.
Any other insights in that? I know there's not a lot of data just yet on that, but
There are sources of it. I mean, geographic differential sources.
Mhm.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics used to do it, and I think there is some
Yeah.
information on the Bureau of Labor Statistics website that could be useful. The thing that they did that I thought was great was canceled years ago with sequestration, if anybody
Mhm.
can remember sequestration. There are other commercial sources. ERI, Economic Research Institute, does it, though they think they charge for it.
Yeah.
The question of combining location and financial size, I always suggest that people look at both of those things, or size
Yeah.
in general and location for executive and director level jobs.
Yeah.
And sometimes people email me and ask me, what do we do? Because the report doesn't tell
Yeah.
us. So I do
Yeah.
sometimes look up in the raw data. It's something I
Yeah.
can do quickly. I'm happy to do it and screen for more than one thing.
Right, right. There's a question from Sandra about foundation staff. Philanthropy is a subcategory in the data, so there is some in there. But I would also recommend that Council on Foundations and other
Yep,
philanthropy peer groups have done much more robust focus surveys on just philanthropy and breaking out different types. So that's out there, although it's not a major piece of what this survey has captured, it seems, over time.
that's right.
Have we looked at unlimited PTO? Again, a fairly new innovation, but has there been any look at that in the survey?
When we ask and people check other and tell us what
Hmm.
other means, we do see some unlimited PTO. It's not common, but I'm not surprised to see it anymore. So maybe that's something that we should
Hmm.
make
Yeah.
an option, and then we would potentially get more information about it.
Right. On the one other question here from another attendee, are you capturing multiple metrics for increase, merit plus COLA versus just COLA, just merit? Do you look into the different pieces that go into that?
The overall salary increase budget number would cover any of them, all of them together.
Right.
And then in the salary increase detail part, they're broken out. So, you can see among organizations that said they did a COLA, you can see what the average COLA was. Or among
Right.
those that said they did merit, you can see what the average merit
Right.
was.
Great. Well, we want to thank you, Rita. This is we're at our hour. Actually, we'll end with Debbie Cannon's question, which was really just a thank you to you, saying this was well worth your time. So thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Rita. We are honored that you will still do this with us after all these years, and we're delighted that you've kept at it for all these years, and you're constantly innovating too. So I'll hand it back to Robert to do a final sign off. But I just want to thank you and thank everybody that joined us for today.
Thanks so much, Jeff and Rita. I'll echo Jeff's thanks for Rita's work on deciphering some of this information for our attendees today. I do want to also thank everyone who registered and joined. You will be receiving a copy of the webinar as well as the slides so that you can have some time to look at those slides. I know there's a lot of information packed into both the slides and the presentation. So do take some time to review the recording and the webinar at your leisure.